Great. So again, welcome everyone to our first Lunch and Learn of 2023. As you all know, this is a continuation of Read by Force Lunch and Learn series, and you should stay tuned for information about upcoming Lunch and Learns coming up in the next few months. We will be communicating those out in our newsletters and social media, so stay tuned for updates on that. And in just a moment, I will pass the mic, so to speak, over to our presenters. We are joined today by Tina Zampitella and Aviva Coyne-Green, who are both with AIM Academy. They will be leading us in a session today on vocabulary development, which, as we all know, is a critical skill for comprehension and skilled reading. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them to give more of an introduction and get the session started. So turn it over to you two.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tina Zampitella, and this is Aviva
Coyne-Green.
We work at AIM Academy. I have been here for about 16 years, so we have been open for 17 years, so almost from the beginning. I'm a background in special ed and curriculum and instruction and Wilson trainer, pathways facilitator, but right now I'm the director of curriculum instruction at AIM. So I work through 1st through 12th grade on, everything encompassing reading and writing and math, really.
So like Tina said, and Alex, my name is Aviva Coyne-Green. I have been at AIM for 11 years. My one constant is that I have been a 5th grade teacher for 11 years. And other than that, I have worn many, many hats. I served as our research liaison for several years, working with our university partners in developing research studies, both in-house and then supporting them with their research initiatives. And most recently, for the last several years, I've served as a curriculum instructional leader in the lower school. So working on everything related to curriculum instruction, specifically in lower school, and then building those bridges and connections to middle school. I've also worked on developing content for the AIM Institute Pathways courses and a whole slew of other things.
We wear many hats. So for those of you that don't know AIM, we are a 1st through 12th grade school for students with language-based learning disabilities. So, one of our biggest missions, our commitments, is to, make sure that we're bringing in the latest research into our classroom practices. So this is something that Aviva and I work really hard with our teachers, trying to, translate that research. Sometimes there's like a disconnect between the research and in the classroom practices. So, Aviva and I work to really connect those to support the teachers. All right.
Awesome. And thanks for folks who are in the chat, just telling us your name, your role or your position, and then what are you're interested in learning about vocabulary. It's great to know who we are with today.
Mm-hmm. All right.
All right, so quick overview of what we're gonna do today. What is our session gonna look like? So we're gonna start by, we always wanna ground everything in the research. So we are gonna start with an overview of the research specifically focused on vocabulary development. And then we'll get into more of the implementation and the practical aspects of things, looking at how we develop word conscious environments. And we're specifically thinking about environments as opposed to classrooms, because we know folks on here might not be actual classroom teachers, which is great because vocabulary can be taught in any context.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will have some time for reflection and sharing.
So before we even get started, we want to acknowledge several people that, we are not researchers. Well, I am not. Aviva has done research, but but we have everything in our presentation. It has come from people that have spent a lot of time researching and, creating so many different resources to support teachers. So Nancy Hennessy, Isabel Beck, Anita Archer, and also we have a lot of information from our AIM Pathways to Proficient Reading course. So we borrowed some of that information too to share with you. So just wanted to make sure that we are acknowledging the people.
All right, so we want to just do like a quick little, gauging background knowledge. So when you feel free to, if anyone wants to unmute and chat and talk out loud, you're welcome to do that. We love the interaction. But if you prefer chat, I know for a lot of you are probably eating lunch right now. 2 questions. You can answer both. You can just answer one. What do you think about when you think of vocabulary? So that's the first part. And then how do you interact with vocabulary during your day? So just take a moment, feel free to share.
People are eating lunch.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about when you hear the term vocabulary, are you thinking about everyday language, or are you thinking about words that I'm directly instructing throughout the day? Oh,
Okay, I think I'm memorizing.
read it. I think of memorizing words. Yes, I remember that when I was growing up. We learned vocabulary through the books where we had to memorize 10 words and their definitions, and then we had a test on Friday. Not very effective, but that's how we were taught. Dictionary. How many people have a dictionary in their classrooms right now?
We were talking about this yesterday.
Does anybody actually have a hardback dictionary?
Awesome.
All right.
And it seems like we have folks from a variety of different, roles. And I think it's interesting to think about when we're thinking about vocabulary instruction, we're not just thinking about, like I said before, in the classroom. Vocabulary can really be developed and fostered in settings all day, wherever the children are.
Great. I think everyone.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, everyone.
All right, so we're just going to start talking about the importance of vocabulary. We know that this is, an essential component of reading instruction. And we, if you don't know, but vocabulary knowledge is related to reading proficiency and school achievement. We found that that's directly related. So we're assessing vocabulary. We can use that to project if a student is going to be proficient in reading and in school. So vocabulary knowledge, I think it's important for us also to mention that it varies for the kids, really also depends on your socioeconomic status. And so we have kids that come into schools with lower vocabularies than other students, really depending on your socioeconomic status. And how do we avoid those inequalities? With vocabulary instruction in schools. So for those of you who have not seen this before, this is an amazing theoretical model by Hollis Scarborough. So we use this in all of our conferences.
Foundation for everything.
In our school. It's very large in our school. It's really a great way. We use it to show parents and even teachers all the different parts that have to go into skilled reading. So you see at the bottom part, we have word recognition. So this is actually just the words on the page, just reading the words and knowing what they say. And then the top section is about language comprehension. All right, and the language comprehension is what do we understand as we're reading, right? So what I can read the words, but what does that actually mean? So we need to make sure that we are combining all of that instruction to support the students for the skilled reading. And one of the most important parts of that is vocabulary. So as you see, it's its own strand. It's a very large strand, and it's a critical strand of language comprehension. Sorry. Another question that we had is thinking about vocabulary instruction. When does that happen in your day? Can anyone tell us that? When does vocabulary happen? Does it happen only at certain points of the day?
Great answer.
Yes. All right, Caroline. All the time. Yes, throughout the day. Exactly. Thanks, Nancy. Vocabulary can be happening at any point. It does not just have to be in the classroom. It can be outside. It can be during gym class, all across the content areas, after school clubs, everything. Vocabulary is something that if everybody, works together to build and to support with the students, it would be really beneficial throughout the day. All right. So defining vocabulary. This is a direct quote from Nancy Hennessy in one of her books, all the words in a language. That's defining vocabulary. You're thinking about that, all the words in the language that you can take either in receptive or expressive language. So receptive language comes through listening and reading, and expressive language is through speaking or writing. And your students may have difficulties with either one of those or both sometimes, but vocabulary really are all the words in our language that we use to understand and communicate. So something else about vocabulary, I think when I first think of just the term vocabulary, I'm like, okay, there's the word and the definition, but there's so much more to that with vocabulary. So we're thinking about the breadth and the depth of the of vocabulary instruction. So deeper understanding of word meaning, so depth versus breadth, has a greater impact on students' overall comprehension. So we can teach 1,000 words to the students, 1,000 vocabulary words, and just teach their words and their definition. But are the students able to use those in context? Are they able to apply those in their writing or in their oral language? Not typically, if they just know the definition, right? So we need to get further into the word. We have to make more connections. We have to dig deeper, talk about connections, talk about the grammar, the syntax, the semantics of a word. There's so much more than just the definition. So these are just a couple of really quick quotes that we pulled from the research that we thought were important. Vocabulary, like I said before, is one of the largest determinants of comprehension. And it's not a one and done. You cannot teach one vocabulary word and then leave it and expect your students to know that. Some students need 15 to 20 exposures to actually acquire the vocabulary, understand it, and be able to apply it. All right, and that's a lot of exposures, and some students need even more than that, really. And as teachers, we can only be teaching 300 to 400 words directly a year, but students are learning about 2,500 to 3,000 words a year. So how are they learning all of these words if we're only directly teaching a small number of them? So if you look at the IES practice standards, What Works Clearinghouse, they give instructional recommendations for vocabulary. And the first line you see here, it says, provide high quality vocabulary instruction throughout the day. Throughout the day, we have to be having this vocabulary. It has to occur throughout the entire school day, with all of our teachers are responsible for vocab instruction. We have all of our teachers take Pathways to Proficient Reading, even if you're in first grade teacher or 12th grade teacher, because we want all of the teachers to understand everything that we're talking about today, right? The vocabulary and the science of reading and how our students are learning. So to think about explicit instruction, you want to make sure that you are introducing the word, you're having the students repeat the word, and then having the repeated exposure and opportunities to practice the word in context. I have a lot of students that can tell me the definition of a word, but that's it. They don't know anything else beyond that. So then you have to work. So how do we actually use this word in our language? All right, and how do we acquire vocabulary? What's the number one way we acquire vocabulary? Does anybody know? Parents, yes, parents, reading, listening, engaging in conversation, right? Oral language. There's a lot of different games that you can, we're going to get into that. Aviva's going to talk a lot about what you would see in the classroom and how we integrate vocabulary instruction. But really there's tons of games that you can be, playing with the kids or, working on with the students. Category games. I think something quick that we like to do with our students is we'll do like pick a category and they have to take turns naming something from that category. And if they can't name something, they're out and then they come back. So like fast food restaurants, right? Burger King, McDonald's, Wendy's. But then you can also include that with what you're learning in your classroom. So if you're learning about animals, having the students name the animals or describing words for the animals. So just oral practice and rehearsal. And I also, too much talking. Also, thinking about the quality of your language. So I always laugh. I'm from the area. I'm from Delaware County, so I'm from Delco. So I have a specific way that that Aviva says that I speak. So I have to be very careful sometimes with how I am speaking in front of the students. I say, water. Water. I have to say water. Crown for crayons. Like I have to be very careful with how I speak because I know that it is not really that formal language. So I just want that high quality language for the students. All right, so then we know that it's important, we have to do it, but what words are we using? What words are we choosing to teach explicitly? You can pull this information from published lists or the tiered approach. So if you don't know the tiered approach, so tier 1 vocabulary is the basic, like commonly used words like, sit, stand, chair. Academic vocabulary is tier 2. And this is where we want to focus, that tier 2 vocabulary. It's not too easy, it's not too hard, and it's used in multiple content areas. So you want to teach words that students will encounter across other areas besides that one area that you're in. And tier 3 vocabulary is more of like domain specific. So in your science class and you're learning about igneous rock, that is a tier 3 type of word. So we're only teaching those words as we encounter that in the text and if that has to do with your main topic, right? But in general, just guidelines for choosing words, thinking about the usefulness of words. Can the students use this, like I said before, throughout different areas, different content areas, different parts of their day? Potential for growth. So when you learn the word instruct, think about all of the parts of that word that you can learn, the prefix, base element, and then also instruction, instruct, instructed, construction, like thinking about how that connects to other words. And then what words do we need to teach that are critical for the understanding?
All right, so I think that gives us all a really great foundation for understanding why vocabulary is important. And now we're going to get into kind of the how. So how do we actually instruct our students and support the children that we are encountering, like we said, all throughout the day. And like we were very purposeful in choosing the term word conscious environments, since not everyone here is in a classroom setting, but how do we get these kids engaged in language? So when we think about instruction, we think about students developing language vocabulary and through their three different instructional practices. The first is direct instruction, and this is what you would typically see in a classroom setting. The second is this idea of incidental language, which is less of the direct instruction, less of the planned instruction, and more just kind of like what comes up naturally in conversation when reading stories. And then word learning strategies. So with the goal of students becoming independent readers, how do they actually manage, figuring out word meaning if they don't know what the word is. And so we're going to go through each of these with the goal of everyone having some ideas and some things that they can bring back into their roles and practices with the kids. Mm-hmm. So at AIM, we have an explicit vocabulary routine. These were developed by Nancy Hennessy. So we actually have two. We have a simple routine and we have a complex routine. The simple routine, and Tina got into this a little bit, is really just the idea of having the students listen to the word. So having the teacher say the word, discussing the structure, having the students repeat the word. It's great to have them clap it into syllables. allowing the teacher to provide a definition. And this is really important, that when we're defining words for students, we need to use everyday language. If we provide a definition that the students don't understand, and there's vocabulary in the definition they don't understand, they're not going to understand the word. And then putting it in context, giving the students examples, allowing them to come up with their own examples, and then actually looking at the word, seeing the word, writing the word, and then saying the word. There's also a complex routine that gets into adding a lot of these various dimensions of words that you'll see some of those activities. So this is just a great little kind of chart to think about the different types of activities that you can do when you're thinking about some of that more direct instruction and diving deeply into the words. So we think about definitions, semantic relationships, visuals, and then speaking and writing. And the big thing about all of these that we pulled today for you is they can all be done orally, which is really great. So one of my most favorite activities is this idea of doing a vocabulary preview. So it's a great way to kind of assess students' understanding of vocabulary, what words do they know, and kind of categorizing it into this idea of like a stranger word is a word that the students don't know, they haven't heard it before, they haven't seen it before. An acquaintance word, they've seen it, they've heard it, but they don't know what it means. And then personally in my classroom, I skip the friend and I just go right to the best friend. And that's the students know the word really well. And this is something that you can do as like a chart, but you can also do like thumbs. So like thumbs up, you can just have the kids give you a thumbs up. They know it really well. They feel like it's a best friend word. Sideways, they're kind of know it, they've heard it, or thumbs down. And the kids love doing this because then they're like, but then I'm in the middle this way, and then I'm on this angle. And it's, once again, just a really great way for you to kind of informally gauge what the students know about the vocabulary that you're going to be learning. Can we get copies of some of the slides? Yeah, we'll talk to Alex about the best way to make that happen. So when we're thinking about just kind of like that basic understanding of the depth of words, word meaning maps are a great strategy for doing this. Thinking about what is the word, what type of action, what words are similar, pulling out examples, contextualizing those examples is really, really helpful for students. Another one is looking at the four-square strategy. So these are just kind of variations of the same type of thing, where once again, we're looking at the definition, the sentence, synonyms and antonyms, and the pictures. Students love to draw pictures connected to vocabulary.
Beneficial.
Yeah, it is. And another one is thinking once again about the different dimensions of the word. So here we might add in the morphemes, and Tina's going to get into morphology in a little bit. But like you can see here, lots of just different ways to structure a more direct routine in terms of diving deeply into a vocabulary word. The next one is thinking about semantic mapping. And this is the idea that we allow students to, where we help students foster connections between words. And that really helps them to think deeply about the words and therefore like really integrate them into their lexicon, which is their vocabulary. So the one I specifically wanted to call out is the one on the top right. You can see it says tag in the middle. This is called a multiple meaning map. And this is great with like short CVC words like tag, for example, and students are just asked to think about all of the definitions of the word tag. And so a word like this, there are so many ways to think about the word tag. This is a great activity that you can do orally when you're walking students down the hallway or if you're at the library, just to really engage them in thinking about all of the multiple meanings of a word. Another really great activity to think about in terms of like building those semantic relationships and those connections is a semantic gradient. This is the idea that you're taking words that are opposites and you might give students additional words, they might generate their own synonyms and antonyms, and then you're thinking about them like in the way that they relate to one another. So this is great with like feeling words. So recently my students, we were talking about the word solemn. So I had them generate an antonym for solemn, and then collectively we generated a couple more synonyms and antonyms. and we put them along this gradient. So like the most solemn to the least solemn. And it's really great to then talk about scenarios and situations. So like if you lose a family member, you're probably not going to be solemn. You're going to be like more than solemn. And it's just a really great way for students to be talking about words and thinking about how they relate and connect. Another great one that can be done orally is this idea of attributes. So this is really great for our younger students who are developing, more basic vocabulary. So you're walking in the park, you see a tree. Let's name colors, shapes, size, texture. What things do you see? This can be done out at recess, really in those more informal settings, which is a really great strategy. That's about changing them for language. Well, yeah, we can answer that question at the end. All right, so we already talked about visuals being a really, really great strategy for students, using word walls, having students generate their own pictures to show that they do really understand it. Vocabulary videos are another really fun and engaging way for students to get involved in thinking about vocabulary. They do this at AIM here in middle school a lot, where they use photo booth and they have to create 10-second video about a vocabulary word. So here you can just see some different examples. And I think one of the most important things to think about is that vocabulary, we talked about it being taught all day long, but it's not just limited to a language arts class. Math is incredibly dependent on vocabulary knowledge. Tina already talked about science, history. So when we think about the way that we teach vocabulary, say in a language arts class, we should be doing the same thing across all content areas. Sentence stems is another great way. So giving students, we in 5th grade at AIM study animals in captivity. So maybe I give my students a sentence frame, animals in captivity are, and they have to complete the sentence and just get them thinking about the words. How can they fill that in? And then with older students who are able to facilitate conversations more independently without so much teacher scaffolding, the idea of Socratic circles and those student-centered conversations to really get the students thinking about how to use the vocabulary in their oral language, because that's the ultimate goal, is to be able to get them to use it in their oral language and in their writing, because that shows the highest level of understanding. So those are thinking about some of the more intentional activities. Now we're going to get into what I think is going to be really valuable to those who are not specifically in a classroom here, is this idea of incidental language experiences. So these experiences are indirect, and they really come from the facilitation of rich oral language between teachers and students. So we know that students acquire an enormous amount of vocabulary from the people that they're interacting with, from the teachers, from whoever is, responsible for them, supporting them. And so by providing these, we are really working to enrich their vocabulary. So some of the things to think about, this idea of being vocabulary attuned. So if you're telling a student to go pick up the pencil, instead of saying go pick up the pencil, you can say can you retrieve the pencil? And just thinking about how can you incorporate the more sophisticated language into just everyday conversations and everyday things that you say. Thinking about, once again, building that in for academic vocabulary as well. And then thinking about how do we support understanding of word meaning? And so how do we make sure that, once again, students know how to access under the meaning of words when they are reading the text? I apologize, the students are coming back from lunch, so it might be a little bit noisy, but welcome to the school day. Everyone's well versed in that. So two great ways to really facilitate this are thinking about read alouds and then structured independent reading. So when we're doing read alouds with students, it's really important that we think about preparing the text, reading it in advance to not only know what kind of questions that we want to ask them, but actually thinking about what vocabulary that we want to focus on. So what vocabulary do we want to directly teach? And what do we just want to have as that, what we call that point of contact, in the moment teaching? When we're doing that, like in the moment teaching, that really looks at like, all right, we read a sentence, you know, it had the word courage in it. Can anyone provide an example or a synonym for the word courage? So it's not, you know, we're not stopping and doing a full explicit routine. It's really just providing that in the moment. And then this idea of setting up structured independent reading. So I'm sure we've all had experiences where we have students go off and read independently, and we don't necessarily know what they're doing. We don't know if they're understanding the text. We don't know if they're able to decode the words. Do they know what the words mean? So really being intentional in terms of how do we structure independent reading. So thinking about what is the purpose of what we're doing, setting the students up to answer the question successfully. Maybe there's a reading guide. This is a great place to incorporate, you know, annotations if you are a classroom teacher and are getting more into that. And then thinking about how do we get students to kind of like focus in on what is most important. So we're going to do a quick little activity. There is a passage. Can you just give me a thumbs up? Can everyone see the passage okay? Okay, great. So take a moment to think about, maybe just choose one word that you would want to. So if you are preparing for this text, it's called A Spy Called James by Anne Rockwell. It's used with our third graders downstairs when they're studying the American Revolution. What is a word that you would use for direct instruction? So that more like elongated, more not intense, but more in-depth exploration versus a word that you would use for point of contact teaching, that more like in the moment while you're reading. Anyone else? So enslaved, would you use that for direct instruction or point of contact?
Are we responding verbally, or are we supposed to be?
If anyone wants to respond verbally, we're happy to do that. But the chat is also fine.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I would use that for direct instruction because it provides an opportunity to speak more expansively about what that means.
Yeah.
So for I would say, you know, enslaved, or we could say, you know, a person, you know, is a slave, but are they a slave? And how does that happen? How does one become enslaved? And someone being taken in their will to do something to work for someone, you know, like it could lead to so many other conversations, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes it really meaningful. And another thing to think about is when choosing words. So I would say this is probably more for like classroom teachers who are working through like a reading unit, thinking about which words are more of these like thematic words that lend themselves to the deeper understanding of the whole, you know, the big ideas, versus just like that word that we really just need to, in order to be able to fully understand the text. Any other words that we might choose?
Maybe interested, that could be an indirect word. And I mean, I think you can relate that to like, what do you like, or what do you want to do, or to get them to get a grasp for that word.
Yeah, absolutely.
Making the connections for the students is like ideal, right? We want to do that because that's how they really can own that word, by definitely making that connection to that themselves.
Freedom, absolutely. Infamous. Awesome. Yeah, so that's just a way to start to think about, you know, these kind of two levels of vocabulary instruction when you're working with students. I know it looked like there was a bunch of folks from the libraries. So thinking about if you're doing read alouds with the kids when they're in the library, this is a great way to start to think about how to be really intentional about the words that you're going to focus on. Great. Spy. Yeah. Great. Awesome. All right.
All right. So I've even mentioned this a little bit, but you know, we have our intentional direct instruction words. We have our incidental words that we are addressing as we're teaching. And then we also have to think about what happens when the students are off alone, you know, having their independent reading, and do they have the strategies to figure out what words mean, what are their meanings, and directly teaching independent word learning strategies is really important because what happens when your students are reading text and they get to a word they don't know? Do they stop and do they try to figure out what the word is? No, they keep going. They skip over the word and they keep reading. And what happens? They lose some of their comprehension. Every time they miss a word, the comprehension kind of, disappears a little bit more. So annotating, as Aviva was saying, I try to get my students to circle words. If you don't know the word, circle it, and then we can come back and talk about it. Dictionary skills were really important to teach students in the past. It was like the research said that, we have to teach students how the dictionary is organized, how to use the dictionary. But in reality, we have a dictionary like with us at all times. When you have your phone or your computers or anything, we use Google. Sometimes I'll have my students, you can ask Siri. Ask Siri, what does this word mean? Like, you'll know in 5 seconds what it means. It's okay to utilize, all of the electronic technology that you can. And then also teaching students how to determine meanings from the context of the sentence. We know that sometimes this doesn't work, but a lot of times it does work. They can figure out what the word means if they know all the rest of the words in the sentence. And one of my favorite things to teach the students is morphology. I think this is really fun. Prefixes, suffixes, base elements. 60% of word meanings can be predicted through their morpheme. So a morpheme is a prefix or like an affix, a prefix or a suffix or the base element. So we have introduced this to all of our teachers. So thinking about all of the science terms, all that morphology that they can help to support their understanding of their information. So, okay. This is just a little bit more information about, the different skills. Morphology, it's like we're inferring the word meaning through the knowledge of the morphemes. So like disrupt means to break. So what does it mean? Disrupt mean? I know that means I'm like breaking into a conversation, right? So we're using those different terms. And when you see rupt in other words, you can help to determine the meanings. So we have to directly teach these to our students. We have to directly teach what is the morpheme and what is the meaning so that they're able to apply this going forward. Because once you teach them some of these morphemes, it opens up the world to so many more words that they come across.
All right. So we wanted to, I know we presented.
Someone raised their hand.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to understand when you said something about the dictionaries and using different ways to find out a word. Do you still go over how to use a dictionary? I mean, I noticed that I have a teenager, he's 15, and he can, it's always like you said, hey, Google, what does this word mean? Or
so
just curious.
I think this is definitely, I think everyone will have a different answer to that question. I personally feel that we have technology and most people don't even have a dictionary. Like I was saying at the beginning, you don't even have a dictionary in your classroom, like a hardcover dictionary or at home. So, why am I going to teach this skill if we have access to the other resources, like Google and Siri?
I think what's really important is thinking about how do students, regardless of the tool they use, how do they actually approach unknown words? And so having a student and then just going on Google, there needs to be another step. Do they actually understand the definition that was provided? So there's so many times where I'll have a student look up a word and they'll be like, oh, this is what it means. I'm like, do you actually have any idea what that means? And they're like, no, right? So we really need to give the students the strategies and the tools to be able to recognize when they don't know what a word means, how to indicate they don't know what a word means, and then what are the steps to actually figure that out.
And this is assuming that they can read these words.
Yeah.
Right. So we also have to, think about that on top of being able to decode the words. They have to understand the words.
Great question. Thank you for asking that. And good point about internet literacy becoming an essential tool. Yeah, absolutely. Just like we need to teach our kids how to use technology and use it appropriately and safely. So the last thing that we're gonna look at is, I know we explored a lot of vocabulary activities, things for instruction that were a little bit more classroom focused. This is really just gonna focus on oral vocabulary activities that really can be done in any setting. So one of my most favorites is wordless picture books. These are such a great way for students to develop vocabulary and their storytelling skills.
And inferencing.
And inferencing. They're really great tools for comprehension in general. These are just some of my favorites. If you haven't seen the Journey Quest Return series, I truly think it's like one of my favorite series that exists in terms of children's books. But just a really, really great way for students to develop their own story and get them, talking and using language and pulling information that they see in the text. What's the best age? I would say elementary. Depending on like the complexity, like the Journey Quest Return are a little more sophisticated wordless picture books. I love to use them. We use them with like 4th and 5th graders. I would say Chalk is probably more of like a lower elementary grade, but just a great way. And it just has to do with what's actually happening in the story. Some of them are a little bit more complex, but wordless picture books can be used with all ages. Just thinking about like, as you would choose any book, is it, like age appropriate in terms of like the complexity of the story. Another great thing is there are so many word games, word association games. My new favorite that my friends and I discovered during COVID is Code Names, which is just such a fabulous for adults and for children. Just great ways to, love Code Names, to get students. And if you have more, please add them into the chat. But the students think that these are just like fun games, but they're really, really tapping into vocabulary. And then did you want to ask me?
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, even like heads up, it's on your phone. I play that with my own children, like if we're waiting to be seated at a restaurant or something, just to keep them occupied, or we're stuck in the car, just having it on our phone, and it helps with like describing words, trying to help, everyone else guess what the word is.
So another activity that you can do orally is this idea of overused words. And so you might put an overused word in the middle, or you can say it out loud. And then students can think about ways that they can incorporate different vocabulary to express the same words. So in class, I sometimes call these like dead words. So like instead of saying good, what are other words that we can say? And you can do that as, put it up on the board, have visual resources, or just do it in context or orally with different language activities. Another great activity is letter sound association. So this is really then getting into the actual letters that are in the word. So maybe you have a basket of little letters, students can pick them out and then have the students brainstorm, the words that start with that letter. These are great things that people are adding in the chat too. Thank you. Word association. This, a lot of the games that were on that last slide are word association games. Maybe you give students 4 words and they have to choose the one that doesn't belong. So the example on the slide says bread, turkey, lettuce, mayonnaise. Maybe you throw in, I'm trying to think of a word that doesn't belong that I can add it, but chair, right? Or so you could add in words and they have to, the candy, they have to decide why it doesn't belong, or they have to explain how all of those words are connected. Another one is semantic clues. And this is a great way to have students review vocabulary. And so this is where, you might have students have synonyms and antonyms, and maybe they have to match them. So you're thinking beyond just like matching a word to a definition, and you're thinking more about the various elements of that word. So to really like foster that deeper connection and understanding. So we would be curious to know, especially these are like really easy, quick activities that you can implement. Does anyone have any thoughts or ideas about how they might use any of these activities in their work with students? Maybe your brain is like sparking all different ideas that you want to share. Feel free to unmute or just put in the chat. Give folks a second. It's also totally fine if you're just kind of still taking it all in.
We gave you, we like to talk. So we
Yes.
know we gave you a lot of information in a short period of time. So we will definitely give you a second.
Yeah.
And while people are thinking, we will definitely post or rather send out the slides. And I could also see this turning into a resource-rich blog post with for Read by Fourth. So we will work on consolidating some of these ideas and sharing them more broadly.
Mhm.
Awesome.
I think when we are asked to present, Aviva and I both present a lot of different types of professional development. And as a teacher, starting out initially as a teacher, when I was in these presentations, like the research is important and we need to know the research, but like, how can I use this with my students? How can I use that directly in my classroom? So we kind of gave a lot of resources to hope that you can choose some that would work for you.
I'd love to hear from anyone in the room now if there's things on here that you've that we've talked about in the last 50 minutes or so that you are currently using and what your experiences are with it, or if there's something that you're learning that you would like to implement.
Mm-hmm.
Or any like problems of practice, what is maybe a struggle
Mm-hmm.
that you encounter.
I know
Yeah.
somebody was talking about phonics or put in earlier in the chat that, how can we integrate the vocabulary with the phonics instruction? And I'm a Wilson trainer, so I have trained a lot of teachers in the Wilson reading system. And while we're going through the different parts, the 10-part lesson plan, I think a lot of times teachers are building the words and thinking, oh, the students just have to read the words. We just want them to read. But you can, include so much vocabulary conversation at the oral level. It doesn't always have to be written down. They don't always have to have a pencil in their hand, but they're really quick, activities that you can do. We always want to be thinking about meaning. Like, yes, we want the students to read the word, but they have to also understand what the words mean. And the more the students know about the words, the better they can decode them and understand, more text. Oh.
Any other questions?
Oh, these are good for tutoring. Yes,
yeah.
Someone said they're going to use them for tutoring students. That's great.
Yeah, making sure that we're explicitly teaching homophones and homonyms. Absolutely.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, the wordless picture books. Those are so great.
Mhm. Awesome. All right, well, our last thing, but if folks have to head out, that's totally fine. Was we just wanted to, we love Google Jamboard. So if folks are able, I'm going to share a link in the chat. If you want to just post on the Jamboard takeaway that you had, something that resonated with you. If you're not sure how to use Google Jamboard, just press a little sticky note. It'll pop up. You can type, click save, and then it'll post. If you have time, if not, no worries, but we do love to see, I know people have been putting in the chat as well, what folks took away from this. So feel free to post in that. I think Tina's gonna post something. What? Yeah,
Like, wow, I love these. They're my favorite. So you can connect them to writing, you can connect them to what you're learning in history, what you're learning in science. And then I can cancel. Oh, somebody else.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Awesome.
can't see them.
I know. We'll make the screen bigger so we can see it.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
For
Thanks.
spending your lunch with us. I know lunchtime is usually the only time you have off. So thanks for listening and joining us.
Yes, and I'm just gonna put our email addresses. Well, I guess, yeah, there it's in the presentation, but Ah,
It's also on the screen right now.
oh, yeah. I wanted to
Good to
copy.
have them covered in multiple
Yeah.
channels.
Yeah, if you have any questions,
Oh, look at this.
or
Great.
want more information, something we didn't go into detail with, we have a lot more. We had to go through and take out like
Yes, we did.
20 some slides to try to cut it down for time, because there's so much that we can say about vocabulary. So we're happy to answer any questions in the future that you have.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be worth a blog post that we can share more widely with the Read by Fourth Partner Network. So we'll be in touch.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah. Thank you both for the session today.
Thanks,
And
Alec.
thank you everyone who made the time to join us today. We appreciate it.
Hi, Nancy. Sharp.
Hi,
I don't know if you
Nancy.
remember.
Thanks, you too. It was excellent. Really
It's good to see you.
Yeah.
good to see you.
All right. Take care, Tina and Aviva. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Alex, bye.
Bye-bye.